contact tracing, I also would worry about the negating kids their ability to access education.
Is there a compromise that we can sunapee this, and that if there's clear, if there's observed risk, that there could be a courtesy email? So for your consideration, so we don't overstep on.
So we certainly have so let's go back to the 5th grade. Remember, we clustered our classes, right? So 4th and 5th graders, when the 5th grade hit 5 kids, we sent an email to all parents in 4th and 5th grade because they have close contacts saying you are and identified as close contact. Please monitor for symptoms. If you feel sick, stay home. So we're doing to that degree. The middle high school thing broke out, and it just broke out.
Yeah.
But we are doing to that level. We've done that level. But I'm not sure I can go
deeper on that.
Yeah.
If we're at a transition point, I want to go back to Carrie's question about sort of how the students do and think. So my curiosity is, how do we catch all of these kids up? Is there some accommodation? Sunapee's pretty demanding. And how is the staff handling? We don't have, there's a lot of talk about whether you can go remote or not. I don't know that if you want to give a short version on that, it's just public education in New Hampshire has a lot of obstacles right now. Because remote is not able to be triggered like it was last year, we can generalize that way. How are these students catching up, and how in the world are the staff with the last couple of weeks with a moving customer base? How is everybody?
Sure, and I can let Sean and Megan get some of that, but our teachers were really good last year with the implementation of the Chromebook across the district. Our teachers were really good with the Google Classroom. We've done a lot of extensive training in Google. Again, in our middle high school, probably from grades maybe 3 up, if not 4 up, utilize Google Classroom and post assignments. Kids know if they needed something, they can, if they're feeling well, they can email a teacher directly and get work. We've had parents call down the elementary school and say, can I come in and pick up some work, pick up the Chromebook, and we just put that stuff together and we prepare it and we get it out. So we've tried to keep kids up that way. Also, so if you were home and you were actually really couldn't do the work for 10 days, it's just like you were out with strep throat or a broken leg, you have that time coming back to make up that work that you missed. So we're not trying to, people aren't being penalized for being out.
Yeah, I didn't mean it so much. It's a caring school, but it's still, we just got recognized by NESDEC. We're a demanding top-level school, and so the workload is higher.
It's heavy lifts, yeah.
So just being realistic, if somebody's out, down for the count, some flexibility on the potential for them to catch up. And I'm also just worried about the staff trying to manage all the different, it used to be kids were in a sequence, largely. Even with special needs to AP in the same room, you could still have a sequence to an agenda, and I don't see how that's even possible. I mean, can you give any light to how your crew is just hanging in there?
Yeah, no, it's I appreciate it's difficult, but I think some things to consider. I'll give a couple examples, even on some things that were just brought up. So, for example, if a student is showing symptoms at school, unless there is a pre-existing condition, allergies, right? So if we know they have allergies and they have this stuff, that's allergies, they don't necessarily have to take a COVID test because of that. However, other than that, if you're symptomatic and we send you home, you have to take a test, and you can't come back to school until you've taken the test. Now, I will tell you, is I'm the one who often delivers that message. If you think that's an easy message, is that people just pick up that phone 100% of the time and go, okay, we'll go right out and take the test. That's not the way life is working, okay? We get emails, we're responding to that, and that's on the very clear ones, right? So very clear where the student is symptomatic. We'll bring them in the office to see the nurse, which is sometimes nurse 1A, sending them home. When somebody misses 10 days of school, the teachers are great, the students are great for all intents and purposes, but if you miss 10 days of math, it's, when you come back, you're gonna have to set up some time to stay after school. You have kids who come in on Saturdays sometimes to make up the work. You know, everybody's done a lot, as Mr. Holden said, you know, some people, you know, myself included in some ways, you know, have pulled back the brakes a little bit because it's exhausting all the time, right? It's exhausting all the time on some of these things. You know, were we safer having lunch every day in a classroom? Yep. You know, but that takes a toll, so we're in the cafeteria right now. Do I think, am I glad we're in the cafeteria right now? The answer is yes, because there's also a mental health component that I think is important. One of the areas we have difficulty with, I will tell you, is in the morning. We have kids walking around the building in the morning, you know, and they're not always 3 feet apart. And they weren't able to do that all last year, but, you know, and we do. We try to, when we see 6 of them get into a group, we will try to break that group up and things like that. But with that said, are there times where 6 groups of kids, groups of 6 together at 7:45 in the morning? You know, absolutely. So, you know, it's very difficult. It's very time consuming, I guess would be a good way to put it. So I think what Mr. Holden has put forth, for all intents and purposes, really is very good. You know, in trying to do these things. You know, it's you know, just going back, some of the easiest ones take a lot of time. A very easy one where a student is clearly symptomatic. Mr. Holden sent the message home, please do not come to school if you're symptomatic. The ones who took the test, by the way, were ones we didn't make take a test. They took a test that we didn't know, right? And they went home, they took a test because they were worried maybe they weren't symptomatic and they came in. Yeah, that happens, and I don't see really a solution to that. I mean, realistically, given that when somebody does have a symptom, and we call, and it's very clear, it's still a very time-consuming process to that. So, I think Mr. Holmes has been very thoughtful. I think he's put a lot of good suggestions out there. I think that, you know, weighing everything, weighing that we do have some strong medical concerns that this is here, right? But also considering that the students have paid a pretty high cost on things as well. And that there's a sense of normalcy that they want to have in trying to balance those two. Are the things that I think we should be trying to do. I think we are trying to do.
Mrs. Reed, you want to add anything?
So it's not a clean, action item. I think we can do this in discussion. I could certainly make a clean action item, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I would like to see, I would like to see the mask mandate in all of our buildings to the 14th. I also want to give the commitment from the administration and the staff within that to work through what that can mean in the best interest of safety and balancing kids' mental health. So I don't want to dilute the message. I want it to be, what thoughts on that? Is that feel like a directionally correct?
Well, it does feel good.
All right, do you agree?
I agree.
Do you agree?
I agree.
Do you agree?
I do.
Do you agree? So unanimously, we'd like to see this through the 14th, and then give you, as things have changed dramatically before this meeting, give you time to the next meeting, and you can inform us along the way. The last thing on this topic, I think that rumors are unfortunate. Everyone is absolutely friggin' exhausted and sick of it, so that's likely there's not some long attention spans and patience with this. I would like to have a cadence of communication, even if it's almost a form letter or a very brief one. This is, you know, modeled off of what you sent before. It's very informative, the last one that you had sent. Just something, even if it's fairly consistent, so that this is, we're doing better, we're doing worse, basic stuff, not repeating the whole thing. Sometimes you get these emails that are so long repeatedly, you don't read any of it. Short, sweet, things are better, things are worse. So parents can feel every week informed and have a consistent message, and then also you're controlling a message and hopefully negating some of the rumors. Does that sound reasonable?
Sure.
That sound all right to you?
I think that's good. I guess I would just, you know, add that, you know, what started out as a sprint is a marathon now, and we're almost 2 years into this, and I think all of us have, you know, leadership or management responsibilities, and it can be, you know, absolutely exhausting some days, and I believe everyone here is working with the best interests of our kids and our families. I believe that 110% and really appreciate the efforts, and just really applaud, you know, y'all for, first of all, recognizing, you know, we've let our guard down a little bit. 2 years, it was bound to happen at some point, but, you know, we've recognized that. It sounds like everybody's recommitted to, you know, raising the bar again and moving forward in a positive direction. So thank you for all you do.
Yeah, it's an infinitely challenging, exhausting time. And so I think having the board and administration send a unified message to the community is important. So I appreciate willingness to have difficult conversations about this. I'm going to check in on other board topics. If there's anything that you're hearing, seeing, want to share, this is a chance to do so. We've got so much on our plate that we're already talking about. I'm not sure there's much left, but I wanted to give the board a chance. It can also be good news. That still happens in COVID. But if there's anything on your mind, you want to share, any topics? Not seeing poker faces, I'm going to move this forward. Action items. We need to approve the proposed Sunapee Middle High School extracurricular positions, which is always one of my favorite actions in years on school board. Is despite how hard this conversation has been, we have several dozen people who are stepping up to do sports, student council, honor society, class advisor. Still one of the only schools, Mr. E, that does ski jumping, Nordic skiing, alpine skiing, varsity skiing. So a bright spot that even in all of this, that the extracurricular, go ahead.
Was ski jumping on there? Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't think we were doing that.
That should not be on there. Okay,
We'll adjust that.
I didn't
There
think
was a
so.
hope, we were hoping, but.
Yeah, well, I thought we were one of the last schools that had it, so then I thought it was out, but then I saw it on, so I just,
We were hoping to get the numbers. Actually, I think it's down to, I think this year in the state, it might be down to 3 schools.
yeah. All right. So I retract that comment, Mr. Reed, but thank you for, if we had it, that you would coach it. All right, so with the minor addition to, minor subtraction, unfortunately, on ski jumping, I have a motion to approve the proposed extracurricular positions.
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed extracurricular positions.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any commentary? All right, I would say can't speak for the board, but I'm guessing we're all sharing some appreciation for the folks that step up to support the students. All in favor of approving this proposed extracurricular positions as noted with the correction of ski jumping, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And motion to accept the proposed 2023 retirement of a Sunapee Middle High School teacher. A motion on that?
I'll make a motion to accept the proposed 2023 retirement of SMHS teacher.
Yeah, so with this being in 2023, I think we can just leave it to them to share that, the public meeting and all that, but when it comes to 2023, we will say more about it with deep praise for a long-serving teacher. Did I get a second? I got lost there.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Just,
Yes. Thank you.
I almost made it back a little
sorry,
while
we're
ago.
off the hook.
But that was much more positive to follow than the COVID conversation, so now the floor is yours.
So, about a month ago, the school board
LRE, least restrictive environment, IEP, individual education plan, LEA, local education agency representative, OT, occupational therapy, PT, physical therapy, and SPL, speech and language. So bear with me as we go through. I'm gonna talk about what all of this means. Special education is governed by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That was enacted in 1975. It was reauthorized in 2004, and it was amended again in 2015 with the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. This isn't going anywhere. Special ed's here to stay. And it gets more complicated with higher expectations as we move through the process. Monday actually marked the 46th anniversary of IDEA. So special education covers students ages 3 to 21. What's important to know is we start working with kids before they're 3, because if a child's been identified in early intervention and services, they bring those students to our attention, and we start evaluating at about 2.5, having meetings and evaluating about 2.5. So, special education is about having a free, appropriate public education. That means there should be no cost to parents. It should meet the unique needs of the student, and it's overseen by the public agency. Stop me at any time if you have questions.
Well, I forgot, when is the binder? Is it 2.5 you start?
What's that?
When you start looking for the kids to evaluate, isn't it 2.5?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, we start that. So there's what's called child find process. We're responsible to go out and seek input from outside agencies. So we have to contact Mount Royal, and we have to contact doctors' offices, and we have to contact hospitals to actively seek, find if there are students with disabilities that haven't been identified yet. So there's a process in that. But yes, it starts at 2.5 with early supports and services. So the special ed process can take 105 or more days, which is a really long time when there's a student who has a need. A referral's made, it can be made by a parent, it can be made by a teacher, anybody who's knowledgeable about the student. Sometimes we get them from doctor's offices. The team meets and goes to disposition of referral to talk about whether or not to do an evaluation plan. And so we condense, these can be separate meetings, we condense the disposition of referral with the evaluation plan. Assuming we decide to go to an evaluation plan, we have 60 days to conduct the evaluations and have an evaluation summary meeting. Again, the evaluation summary meeting and eligibility determination we do in one meeting. If the student is found eligible, and we'll get into more of this as we move on, we have 30 days to write and implement an IEP and decide where the placement for that student will be. So again, 105 days is a really long time. Required members of team. Some people lose perspective about how many people are sitting around the table when we have special ed meetings. Parent is a critical member of the team, and we work really diligently to involve our parents. We have used a variety of mediums, including phone conferences and Zoom. And I think parents have been appreciative of our willingness to adjust accordingly. Gen Ed teacher, critical component. And our Gen Ed teachers are fantastic about coming to meetings and being involved in those meetings. They're able to talk about content, they're able to talk about barriers and successes, which is fantastic. The special ed teacher is sort of guiding the conversation and is another critical component in terms of understanding how to overcome some of those barriers. The LEA, you guys would probably see that as the building administrator or an SAU administrator. That person's responsible for supervising the provision of special ed, knowing what the resources are that are available, and being able to guide the process. Related service personnel are speech and language, OT, PT, BCBA, which was one of the acronyms I didn't give you, board certified behavior analyst. And then other knowledgeable individuals. This is often somebody that a parent brings to the table. But it could be another person that the student had this teacher last year and we're gonna involve them in the team this year. Or a paraeducator that's working with the student we might have attend. Once we go into evaluations, there are so many different types of evaluations.
That's a good question. You don't have
Yes.
to back up.
So with COVID, those meetings you usually used to do in person. How is it going using Zoom? Or when you do those, you do the meetings with your whole sports roster of players that have to be there. It's a lot of people.
It is.
Because you must be mostly Zoom or some hybrid, maybe staff here. How is that going?
It can be tricky, I'm not gonna lie. On the whole, we found hybrid is not very effective, especially if it's the parent who's not in the room. There's less interaction. It's just not a great model. You want if you're gonna be around the table, you really want the parent around the table. That's not to say we don't do it. We'll do whatever we need to do, and if the parent's happy with that, then we would certainly support that. Zoom has made it much easier, and we started off the year saying, we will provide in-person, but if you want Zoom, we will do Zoom. We've ended that, we're going to have we'll have a Zoom meeting unless you specifically ask to have an in-person meeting. And that seems to be more effective. And it works out better for everybody, especially with people across the district. So again, lots of different types of evaluations. This isn't all of them, but this is some of the ones that we provide. I think what's important to know is that evaluations actually take a really long time. I touched base with my school psychologist who does the academic, adaptive behavior, cognitive, and on average, a regular evaluation takes her about 26 hours all in. So just frame that, like 26 hours to conduct an evaluation is a long time. So once we've done the evaluation, we go to an evaluation summary meeting, and we talk about whether or not the student's eligible for special ed. There's two primary components. One is there has to be a disability, and the second is that they have to require specially designed instruction as a result of that disability. So let's talk about disabilities. Many categories of disabilities. I'm not going to read them all to you. But I think it's important to understand that there's criteria around all of these disabilities through federal and state law that drives the decision-making about whether a disability is even present. Specially designed instruction is the core of special education. It means we are doing something different that meets the unique needs of that student. And specially designed instruction is a change in delivery of instruction, a change in the methodology of instruction, or a change, in rare cases, a change in content. The change in content really should be the very last thing that you do for students. But it happens, and it's appropriate to happen for some students. So, you have a disability, you require specially designed instruction, and we write an individual education plan within 30 days. We typically meet 14 days from the evaluation summary to get this written so that the parents have 14 days so that they have 14 days to consider it and sign it. An IEP is always to access the general ed curriculum. You're providing whatever the missing skill is so that they can access what everybody else is doing. And sometimes the gap is this big, and sometimes the gap is this big. And so they look very different depending on what the need is. So the two primary components of an individual education plan that people talk about most frequently are annual goals and services and supports. But there are a lot of other components: present level of performance, short-term objectives, accommodations, modifications, supplementary aids and services, and transition plans. So once you have an IEP formulated, you're looking at placement. And you're always looking to ensure that the student is in the least restrictive environment. And that means they are getting their special ed services as close to the general ed setting as they can be in this continuum. And these last two, I got this from Iris, these last two boxes, some people would swap them. So if you were to show this to somebody else, somebody might say, oh, I don't know about homebound versus residential. They could go either way. But the idea is that you provide it in the least restrictive environment possible. If we're talking about out-of-district students, it's always as close to the home school as possible that can meet the unique needs of that student. All right, so that's the process of identification and getting started. But this is actually where the real work begins, and I'm not gonna spend tons of time on this, but this is where implementation comes in. Like, now you're off and running. Now you're getting kids what they need. And so you're providing instruction, and you're developing accommodations, and you're providing modifications, and you're coordinating outside providers, and you're coordinating inside providers. And once you've started the implementation process, you go into progress monitoring. We are required to progress monitor students on each of their IEP goals. What does that mean? That means daily, weekly, or every other week in this district, you are required to be progress monitoring. And so that means touching base and taking data in addition to doing all of your instruction and service providing. Progress reports are required and have to come out at the same time report cards come out, depending on what they are. Some people would say quarterly, which is fine here, but at the elementary school it's trimester. So it's whenever a report card comes out, we have to provide a progress report on students' goals. Every year we have to have an annual IEP and placement meeting to update everything, and then every 3 years we have to reevaluate. Questions so far? Sorry, I know I'm going really fast.
You're telling a really long story, but I think it's just
Important for us to get a reset as a board, but I also think it's important for the community to understand, especially as special education needs are increasing. So keep tugging, you're doing great.
So it occurred to me that sometimes it's helpful to put this sort of in perspective. So we have student X. The parent came to the school and said, I'm concerned, there are some behavior things going on. The report card said he's struggling in reading. I'd like you to take a look. The team meets and decides, yeah, I think you're right. I think we think there might be something going on. Let's take a look. And so we had to pick a suspected area of disability in that evaluation process. We need to know what it is that we're looking for as we go into these evals, because for some of these there are required assessments. So for other health impairment, academic and health exam are required. For an emotional disturbance, academic and social emotional are required. But it doesn't usually stop there. In this case, executive functioning or organization, management, self-regulation assessment was necessary. A vocational assessment was necessary because the student's 16 years old, and a sensory assessment was necessary because they talked about having sensitivities to light or hearing sounds. Fast forward, he's found eligible for other health impairment and emotional disturbance. So we get to an IEP and we're gonna write goals around how to organize our materials. That's the self-help goal. There's gonna be a goal around reading because there was a deficit in the area of reading. As a result of those goals, there are some services that need to happen. They need specially designed instruction in executive functioning. They need specially designed instruction in reading. And again, specially designed instruction is individualized. So it's not, let me put 6 kids together, I'm gonna give them I'm gonna give all 6 the same thing. Because of those 6, this one might need this type of reading, and this one might need phonics, and this one might need reading comprehension. Multisyllabic words, it depends on what the need is. Related services are services that prevent barriers so that they can get the specially designed instruction and get to content area. In this case, it was counseling and occupational therapy. And then finally, placement. Where are we gonna deliver the SDI and the related services? When it can be done, it would be done in the gen ed classroom. In this particular situation, the placement was in a special ed setting in the resource room. So not that they were in the resource room all day, because you can't do that, but they would go to the resource room to get these things. Questions? Okay, what does it look like in Sunapee? Some of you have heard this already, so I apologize. I think it's important to start with the mission statement from Sunapee, because that is the basis for education for all students. Tier 1 is your regular reading, writing, math, social studies, sciences, guidance, because everybody gets guidance, your access to the school nurse, access to library, technology, we have an adjustment counselor. It's what all students have access to. Tier 2 are targeted interventions. Some good examples of targeted interventions, which are typically done in small groups, would be Title I reading groups at the elementary school, or math essentials here at the middle high school are good examples of Tier 2 supports. Now, some students can get their specially designed instruction in Tier 2 classes or groups, but that's not always the case. Finally, there's Tier 3, which are your individualized supports. These can still be done in groups, but it's less frequent. You're more likely to be one-on-one or much smaller groups with a much higher level of intensity. And so I just want to point out that what we call, and we've been talking a lot about budget, what we call special education and what we put in the special education budget crosses all of these, but primarily Tier 2 and Tier 3. There are a lot of at-risk students that we provide Tier 2 supports to, and we'll get into that as I move forward. So, our numbers. I know data is important. As you can see, we've gone up 50, 55, 59. That's our October 1 count. Referrals, we went from 25 to 34, and as of 11/1, we were at 13. I think we're at 15 as of today. If we maintain that trend, we're looking at 45 at the end of this year, which is pretty significant. Now, let me roll back around to, it takes a school psychologist 26 hours to do an evaluation. So if we have 34 or 45 referrals, plus our reevaluations from the other 59 students, or at least a third of that, the other 20 students, that's a lot of evaluations. And then out-of-district placements. Our out-of-district placements have gone up pretty significantly as well. questions on that. I think it is important, I have some asterisks. 1920, we weren't in school for the whole year, and obviously 2021, our group sizes were limited because that's more important than next one.
One of the things I don't think, I was surprised by,
And I'm not sure the community understands. So if you go back to that level of increasing demand, a reasonable estimate of how many non-special education coded evaluated students do need special ed services or utilize. I think.
Are you talking about at-risk students?
Well, general population isn't coming in ready to learn physically and emotionally. It's what's ahead for us, and it's exacerbated by the COVID kids, youngsters. You had said at one of our meetings in the last year or two that generally how these services extend to kids that aren't necessarily the most at risk, to clearly IEP, most in demand. Can you give some insight on how some of the special ed services extend to some of the general ed kids that maybe don't end up in these programs?
Yeah,
You got it? Okay, cool.
I think I got that covered, but if I don't, ask it again, please. The other thing I did want to mention here, I think it's important to know, it was brought to my attention today and I hadn't given it a lot of thought. Our preschool numbers tripled. Our identified preschoolers tripled in 2 years. So, just a sort of just an overview of the IEP-driven services. This is an estimate, but you can see, we've got 59 students. There's a lot more services, and I think the purpose of this is just to show you that a student doesn't typically get a single service. They're getting a multitude of services. And this isn't an exhaustive list. This is just sort of the top ones that come to mind. I think this is what you're looking for. So, pulled some early intervention. I kept calling it at risk, but really what we're talking about is early intervention. And we know that early intervention pays off pretty significantly long term for kids. So, again, I want to draw you to the COVID correlations because these numbers, I think in 1920 and 2021 are a little bit deflated anyway due to COVID. But I think you'll see over time that this is going to be exponentially greater. So SCES, social emotional learning for at-risk services, we had 8, 15, and 17. You can see the increase pretty clearly there. Speech was low last year. That was in part due to the increased need of IEP-driven services and because we weren't seeing kids together. Speech is one that it's really hard to have masks, and so it was difficult to have a lot of students together to do that, so they saw less students. But as of the 1st of November, you can see the numbers are bounced right back up, and I expect that that will increase pretty significantly. OT, same situation, and I think the one that's probably most concerning to me and maybe speaks to what you're talking about, Jesse, is the suicide risk assessments. In 1920, we did 5. In 2021, we did 17. As of the 1st of November, we had done 5. Clearly an upward tick. So again, we're providing services, and although it doesn't say it here, our school social worker, adjustment counselor is meeting with so many families. The need has become quite significant. She doesn't sit still at all. And so she's meeting with those families very regularly. And I think at last count, she was up to 45 this year. So. Questions and answers? Did that, I hope that was what you were looking for.
I think the only thing that I would maybe ask if you could just give, just for everybody's benefit, just cost-wise, to support these kids, on the low end of the spectrum versus the high end, what's the ballpark that we're talking about in terms of cost to support them?
Highly variable. So we have at least a student who's about $300,000. And we have some other students who it would be hard to really flush out. One study showed it's about 1.5 times what it would be to educate a regular ed student in a similar environment. I think that's an underestimation, but I think it's probably as close as you're gonna get right now, in terms of the different, I do have data on that, and I'd be happy to share it.
I was just thinking about relative to state funding that's received, it can be pretty woefully inadequate, right? If you've got somebody on the really intensive need end of the spectrum.
Absolutely. So in terms of funding, there are a couple different funding streams. We have Medicaid, which for those of you who haven't already heard me talk about it, they changed the regulations 2 years ago, and sent everything in a tailspin, and we're still recovering from that. The expectations are different, the level of documentation that we need is different and more intense. So your ability to recoup some of that money is going down. We have the IDEA grant, which is the Federal Entitlement Fund. IDEA has never been fully funded since 1975 when it was enacted. There is some momentum right now in the federal government to change that and put us on a 10-year track to be fully funded. Not sure if that will happen, but I can tell you for us, for next year, our federal funding will go down, and that's because the state changed its funding formula. And so we were getting money relative to our tuition students, which really should have been going to the towns that pay us to take their kids. And so we were inflated for a period of time, and that's gonna be readjusted this next year. Talked about Medicaid. Special ed aid is the other, or other people know it as catastrophic aid, and that is when you hit 3.5 times the per pupil cost, which is set by the state, and then you get 3 times reimbursement, and then there are different cutoffs. One's 3 times and one's 10 times. So.
Yeah, so I would say that's what we have to do.
That was very informative. It's a lot to whittle down to that short of story. Scott?
I just, a lot of people, maybe haven't interacted with you or, don't know what you do, but I think this is great. You've brought a lot of good insight into our annual budget deliberations, because this is an area, that can impact the budget, one way or the other. And, you brought up some good points. I think a few years ago, you actually saved the taxpayers money because you hired people so it could keep the students here instead of spending $300,000 or $400,000 sending them out of district. And, we're obligated to meet that obligation either way. So I've been, just impressed by how you balance the need to do the job right, with the budget. You look at that every year. You look at what's coming down the pipeline, and it's not a science, but.
I'm a very strong proponent in programming, where we can program here. I think people who have experienced it have been able to say, we have so much more control. The programming is, we can give such better programming. We can do this better than these other places. And if you've ever been out to some of the out-of-district places, they serve a purpose. They do wonderful things for some students, but it's not the end-all be-all. And we can't always do it. Like, I'd be the first to say, there are just some students that it's not appropriate. We're not equipped to do it. More often than not, I think we are, and I think programming is a critical component. It's something we're looking at every year.
Thanks to you and your team.
Team, and thanks tonight to you for the informative update. Appreciate it. You now don't have to do any more AV headaches for the rest of the evening. Remote weather instruction days, Mr. Holden.
So Jesse, I think you asked a question earlier, I'm not sure I answered it fully in COVID. Folks remember last year that districts based upon high COVID numbers could go to remote instruction, or encouraged to use remote instruction. Some districts were in remote instruction all year. The governor of the Department of Ed mandated school districts back in school in April. Some went, some didn't. But part of also the remote instruction last year was that we could use remote instruction during inclement weather days. Again, the Commissioner of Education has been very clear to us as superintendents in the proposed rules changes on when remote instruction can be used. It is allowed to be used for inclement weather days when the roads are impassable. That permission has been given to us by the State Board of Education. And so letting you know that we will continue to use remote instruction days during inclement weather. Spoke with the faculty again today. It'll be run very much like last year. If we know there is an impending storm coming, I notify the teachers in the morning the day before, prepare them to give kids work. Typically somewhere between 3 and 4 o'clock, I call it for the following day. Kids know they need to be checking in with their teachers and when they're asked to check in, teachers are available between 8 and 2 to deal with students, give direct instruction if needed, answer questions, whatever it may be. Our teachers also understand that, well, they are responsible to be on. Sometimes our kids may be babysitting and they have other responsibilities. And so students know to go into Google Classroom to be able to get work and to be able to produce that work and bring it in the following day. There is an attendance requirement. Folks may remember the term blizzard bags that we used well before this. There is no attendance requirement where 80% of our kids need to show participation. Our kids will show participation and that will be graded by our individual teachers through that classwork. I think the question that was asked a lot last year, will we ever have a snow day? The answer is absolutely yes. We will absolutely have snow days. We will not call a remote instruction day at 5:30 in the morning. Again, this is something where we know storms are coming. Believe it or not, if you look back at last year, we knew ahead of time the day before there were big storms coming, and it allowed us to really implement these remote instruction days. So just letting the board know that we will continue to implement our remote instruction days during inclement weather during the winter.
Questions or comments? Okay, thank you for that. Negotiations update. This is teacher contract negotiations. There's a 3-year contract that would be on the warrant article in March for voters.
Unless Carrie and Ed want to add, like I said, we came to an agreement, the teachers have that, and they're going to ratify that, and you'll get to take a look at that agreement, or Ed and Carrie will talk to you about that agreement in the January 12th meeting. I don't know if you'll talk about anything else, Ed.
Yeah, so you have updated, you have an agreement, which is in this meeting, December meeting, that's ideal that both sides reach an agreement. Manifest. Can I get a AP manifest motion and a second as read?
I can make a motion for EP manifest 2022-08, 86,272.69, 2022-09, 116,049.94, and 2022-10, 82,242.49.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Easier one for payroll manifests, please, from one of you.
Motion to approve payroll manifest 2022-10, $259,928.25, 2022-10.1, $1,745.05.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We're going to public forum. This is new policy, or second meeting we've had policy. I missed my notebook. It's 4 minutes.
20 minutes.
20 minutes total, 4 minutes each individual. The intent of public comment is to hear what is on folks' minds, and if it goes into any kind of things that are too personal or not appropriate within the decorum and the guidelines, then I will say point of order and you forfeit your time to speak. I'm not sure I've ever had to do that, and I'm hoping tonight I don't, or in the future I don't have to, but we do have to respect everybody, and this is our respect for you. So if you want to go to the mic, introduce yourself and where you live, we like to hear from the community. You can signal.
But I'm not gonna go fast.
You go at your pace that's comfortable is exactly what we're hoping for.
So my name is Mindy Atwood. I'm the director of the Abbott Library. And I just wanted to report back to the board that just today we received notice that we were selected for the grant that I briefed this board on 2 meetings ago, maybe. So we were fully funded in the amount of $14,971. With that grant money, we will be creating a shared catalog between the Abbott Library and the 2 school libraries. And we will be purchasing some additional materials to be shared for use in the schools during the school year, and then will be available for checkout during the summer to provide a continuity of learning for our students. So, good news, non-COVID related.
Thank you, congratulations, but a deep thank you.
That's awesome. Appreciate it. Next person who wishes to speak, please.
Kirk Bishop, I live at 162 Jobs Creek Road. Lived in Sunapee for 10 years. I appreciate the opportunity to share a few thoughts tonight. First, a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from. Always been passionate about education, especially at the high school level. Attended a public high school located outside Pittsburgh. My first job out of college was teaching at the high school level, specifically teaching chemistry, coaching football, lacrosse at Mercersburg Academy, co-ed boarding school in South Central Pennsylvania. Much later, when my kids were in the K-12 age range in Wenham, Massachusetts, I was active in influencing new construction at the public school system. When all 3 of our kids opted to go to the local independent day school, Pingree School, for high school, I became involved as a member of their school board, serving for 10 years, the last 4 of which as chair of that board. Current time, I spend my spring back in Massachusetts so that I can continue to help coach boys lacrosse team, and I still serve on their committee and trustees. I tell you all this so that you just know that I am not foreign to the challenges and joys of public education, particularly high school education. With regard to Sunapee schools, my views have evolved significantly over the last 3 years as I've gotten more involved, learned things I didn't know about Sunapee and the surrounding area, visited the facilities, observed some of the classes in session, gotten to know some of the players, and gone to several of these school board meetings. I first started to vote in Sunapee in 2019. I voted against the $20 million plus bond, a vote which I do not regret. I then volunteered to serve on the Community Advisory Committee, hoping that I could help evaluate options for what to do next. Based in large part on what I learned from that experience, volunteering on that committee, I voted for the $10 million plus bond and continue to believe that the town would have been well served if it had passed. My comments for you tonight, I think, represent not only my opinions, but also the views of a significant number of quiet senior citizens, those whom we are not likely to see at these meetings. 4 basic observations. 1, quality of the teaching and resulting learning that takes place at the Sunapee school system is remarkable. I was especially impressed by the teachers that I met, especially when I got to see some of them in action. 2, I believe we are very fortunate not only to have the professionals that teach here, the administrators that oversee their work, but also the volunteer citizens who serve on our school board. I believe they collectively embody an intellect, a personal integrity, and a sense of community service for which we should all be grateful. Thank you to each and every one of you. 3, I believe that the most efficient use of our tax dollars is to provide an infrastructure worthy of the current educational process as efficiently as possible, with an eye on health, safety, and current educational practices. I believe that essentially this is what was in the last bond, and similar to what we're likely to see again in March, reinforced by what I heard tonight. The deferral of maintenance projects over the last 20 years is a regrettable shame, and this is, in my opinion, the minimal make-up call, the 10 million, not the 5 million. Minimal make-up call which our students and teachers deserve. And number 4, I almost hesitate to add this one, but as long as I have the floor, I have a comment in reaction to current efforts to impact the books which our children can read and the history which they are taught. I want our teachers to be free to teach the truth whether it be in the math class or in the English or history classroom. And then I want them to teach critical thinking, the ability to form and articulate a position. I want our students to develop the conviction and courage to defend and or just a chosen position based on what additional facts or different ways of viewing the truth. And I want them to be encouraged to work hard to understand and embrace the fact that others may hold positions different from their own. The current conservative positions around so-called critical race theory and the effort to ban books that embrace human differences are counter to what I believe should be the direction of our educational system. Thank you.
Next speaker, please. It's motion and it's yours.
Hello, Adrian Scott, 203 Timothy Road. I have 2 children in Sunapee Elementary. I am very grateful that we have talked about COVID protocols again and are readdressing those. I think especially since we've had 2 outbreaks, it is time to kind of stop bailing out the boat and start patching up the holes. One thing, last school board we talked about the rapid tests. I'm being told that we are not able to use the rapid test because the state will not sign off on us using it unless we do surveillance testing. And so the rapid tests are just sitting in the nurse's office collecting dust, which isn't doing us much good. So I don't know if we can agree to surveillance testing, allow them to come in, do the spot testing, and then be able to use those rapid tests that we have been given by the state. Number 2, I just want to make a comment. I know that there were COVID cases in the school prior to Thanksgiving break. I did not receive an email until 3:20 after my kids went home for Thanksgiving break. So I was not aware of the numbers in the school, which means I was not able to make a decision for my children who are still in the process of trying to get fully vaccinated. And as we know, have health conditions, which are concerning. The other thing that I've heard from parents from the middle high school who had kids who were sent home with COVID positive, they did not hear from the school. They did not receive an email with instructions on when the kids could go back. They didn't know. And so I heard from one parent that they sent their kid back and was told that, oh no, they still had to quarantine. And so they didn't get any information, which I think is a concern as well. I don't know if there's a form letter that can be sent out to all parents that have a COVID positive student with instructions so that it's very clear and they know what is expected and how long that student has to be out. And the other thing that I want to mention, there are lots of schools in the area in the state of New Hampshire that are having vaccination clinics. Last year, Sunapee had a flu vaccine clinic, which was fantastic. I think it was great for the school, the students, and the community who wanted flu vaccines. I'm not really sure why that wasn't done again this year. I couldn't get my 5-year-old a vaccine because apparently the pharmacies will only do 9 and up, and I missed the pediatric clinic at Dartmouth, which was only going on for a week. And then there's also like a mobile vaccination van that goes around. You just like sign up and they arrive at your district and they can give vaccines. And I think that would be a great addition so that parents, I'm hearing so many parents say they can't get their kid in to get vaccinated. And Russell, I appreciate the email that was sent out that gave us instructions